Thanks. So HTTP monitoring is an important thing across all companies. You all know that. And the plugin we use to monitor such web endpoints is alive since 25 years. And it did a very good job. The plugin provides the most basic information about general availability, response times, or for basic content checks. Also, the plugin turned out to be very resilient for, let's say, interesting web implementations. Yet, it more and more lacks features or options for a changing IT world. And HTTP 2 support is just one of the more prominent examples for that. I mean, it already got its successor by HTTP 3. But if you need a new feature or a bug to be fixed, we cannot just add that to the plugin directly in Checkmk. We need to raise an issue on monitoring plugins and then have to be patient while waiting. And this waiting for a bug fix sometimes includes waiting for a fix on Nagios plugins and the translation to the version of monitoring plugins. So the steps to fix a bug includes raising the issue, waiting for the fix and adoption, waiting for the next release of monitoring plugins, applying the new version in Checkmk, and finally releasing a Checkmk version containing this fix. And this often takes months, sometimes years. We're still waiting for TLS 1.3 or HTTP 2 support. So what can we do about that? We could have switched back to Nagios plugins in hope for faster bug fixes or eventually new features. We could also have switched to another implementation from monitoring plugins itself, for example, Checkmk. And we could engage directly as a contributor to one of these two projects. But the main problem would persist. We have no ability to fix bugs within the next patch release of Checkmk or even add features for a future release. More importantly, Nagios plugins use C as a programming language. And as a fork, the same applies for monitoring plugins. This allows implementing things on a very low level, but is also much more error-prone, as we could see most recently with the problems during parsing of HTML page bodies. So we chose a fourth option by implementing the plugin ourselves. This allowed us to own the code and use a programming language we are already familiar with. We're finally able to provide the outputs in our Checkmk style, using part results and avoiding redundant information. And finally, we are able to add new features much more easily and as needed. It allowed us, for example, to implement all the new features. 6 of them I will show you now. Maybe. Oh. I guess the biggest change is the ability to create more than one service within a single rule. With the new design of configuring active checks, you are able to create as many services as you need per host. And this is especially useful if you have a set of HTTP endpoints that you want to monitor from different locations. You just need one single rule assigned to all affected hosts on a different Checkmk sites. The configuration of an endpoint itself has been simplified and organized in a more transparent way. The first part is to give your service a name. This has been confusing in the past, as a dynamically added prefix was not explicitly configurable. Instead, you had to add a circumflex at the beginning of the service name to disable that feature. And now it's transparent that the service name contains 2 parts, and you can control the prefix directly. This complements with the ability to provide the complete web address in one piece, considering the official notation of URLs. It's also adding transparency to the URL that you want to check. And please note, there's one exception here. You must not enter credentials in this field in plain text, but you have to use the authentication option instead. And this allows us to hide the information in the service details and allows the usage of the Checkmk password store. Of course, also macros are supported to be used in the URL as well as in the service name. With that, you have a bunch of possibilities to fully automate your HTTP monitoring rules by using the data directly from the host properties instead of providing them explicitly in the rule. And to control the shared configurations of your endpoints in a rule, you can use now standard settings that apply to all endpoints in this rule. This allows you to define things once and make them effective for all. And this also applies for later changes. But what if you need an individual override for a specific endpoint? I mean, you did already see the answer in the slide. You can just define them per endpoint. It's simple as that. This allows you to override standard settings or thresholds as well as to remove the option completely, like the check for response times. Rather than defining individual thresholds like you see in the screenshot, you could also just use no levels to disable the check for this endpoint completely. And finally, you all have been waiting for, you are not forced anymore to create two rules to monitor a single HTTPS endpoint. Just decide now if you want to monitor the content and the performance together with the certificate in one service, or keep them split as before. It's now totally up to your requirements and not predetermined anymore. But as I said, rewriting the plugin ourselves does not only give us opportunities on the configuration side. It also gave us total freedom in structuring the service output. You get more insights into that part in the next talk, so I will focus on the main topics here. With the new plugin, you get a much more precise summary without the redundant written state, including a focused summary if everything is fine, and with part results if something went wrong. And of course, you get all this information also in a structured way in the service details. As you can see here. So some data will always be shown, such as the method being used to connect to the HTTP endpoint. Other data will be present as soon as it becomes relevant, such as the URL the check has been redirected to, which you will see in the next talk. And all in all, you get a much more precise information of what you wanted to check at all and the according results without the need of looking into the rule again. And this level of insights in the service details is something that is completely new for the HTTP monitoring services. So let me summarize the new HTTP monitoring. We already added some long-needed features directly during the rewrite, such as token-based authentication, HTTP 2 and TLS 1.3 support, or the option to include a basic certificate monitoring directly in the same service. We added the possibility of adding multiple endpoints per rule, improved the service summary and details, and even got a slightly better performance, especially in scenarios where HTTPS is used. And here we could have stopped, right? But when we initially started, we had this weird problem of one rule set being responsible for the creation of two different kinds of services. One option to solve the situation has been to split this single rule set. We would have simplified the configuration and valued the fact that monitoring web services is a different task than monitoring certificates. During internal discussion, a colleague of mine boiled it down perfectly. Monitoring certificates is not exclusive to the HTTP protocol. In the end, it's not even exclusive to TCP. So as you meanwhile know, we eventually kept basic monitoring of certificates in the HTTP rule set, yet we still realize that we have the opportunity to add a complete new value to Checkmk by enabling monitoring of certificates regardless of the application protocol behind. Back then, we still thought that we will do the rewrite along the way, and so we shifted the scope of the certificate monitoring and gave it much more space. Unfortunately, migrating the original certificate monitoring scope to its own rule set looked a bit sad. It was a single option with a threshold and definitely not what we would call a cool and useful feature. So we had to add some more value to this part to make this plugin happen. And to illustrate this, why it is actually important, I will shortly guide you through a true story that went public by the end of last year. Some of you may know that. Radically simplified, when you're using a service in the internet, you connect as a client, and the server on the other side provides a certificate to prove that you're talking to the right machine and to encrypt the transferred data during that particular session. And the story now begins that some people run these Java messaging servers. The older guys here and women may know this. It's not that popular anymore. That uses certificates to do exactly what I just described, ensuring the authenticity and encrypt the transferred data. To accomplish that, they used the well-known Let's Encrypt service, and it was working totally fine until October 2023. Suddenly, the administrators got user reports about an expired certificate for their Java service. But even as all certificates on the service seemed to be up to date, still the clients got an outdated one. And after some investigation, including log analysis and the extensive usage of Wireshark, they found out that the certificate provided to the client has not been issued by any of the Java servers. And the clients, even ending up on the correct Java server, in the end made their connection to a completely different server on a different port. So they have been clearly under a machine-in-the-middle attack since quite some time. And there are some ways to do that. In this particular case, the attacker put a transparent proxy between the clients and the servers. And for that, the attacker got the required help of the datasend provider himself, as you need to route the traffic to a different network address to make that happen. And this change caused a network interrupt of only 6 seconds. No one noticed the attack at all for at least 6 months. And potentially this would have been still undiscovered if not the attacker simply forgot to renew the certificate. Even if the administrators of these servers would have been monitoring the validity of their certificates, they also still would not have discovered the man-in-the-machine-in-the-middle attack, as the used certificates have been officially issued and valid, at least for some time. So long story short, what I want to say is you should monitor more than the validity of your critical endpoints. And I know that there's no bulletproof monitoring if someone really wants and has the resources to intercept your encrypted traffic. But you can make it much harder to hide such an attack by monitoring other parameters of your certificate. And that's the point where we kind of escalated by adding massive functionality to ensure that your certificate is really yours and is matching certain requirements. The new active check is currently only limited to TCP, and beside of that, able to check certificates on any application protocol, except for Start TLS. You cannot only check for certain thresholds, such as the assurance that your certificate will expire after 90 or 180 days latest. You can also check for a lot more values to ensure the authenticity of, for example, the issuer or subject, or to ensure that internal policies are fulfilled by checking the used certificate signature algorithms. So all in all, what you see here is the first but extensive set of options we already added in Checkmk 2.3. And of course, you get in the certificate services also the improved results, including part results if more than one check was not okay. To explore and use the new rules, you need to find them. Both new checks are located in the same menu entry as the other active checks for HTTP and TCP. And you will notice the new topic here, networking, and the new HTTP and certificate monitoring will be located here. We will use such topics more often with the new ruleset API to organize the rules and make them easier to find. The old HTTP check is still fully available in 2.3 to enable you a smooth migration, and you find it here where you know it. So speaking of smooth migration, as the new HTTP check is much more strict and precise, a migration may take some time. This and the optional consolidation of HTTP and HTTP certificate monitoring are the main reason why we do not provide an automatic migration. It's just not possible to have a standard way of migration that works for all users, or at least for most of you. On the other side, migrating manually has the opportunity to make use of all these new features. The old rule set, meanwhile, will be deprecated, beginning with Checkmk 2.4 and removed in Checkmk 2.5. This should give you more than enough time to plan and execute your migration properly. And additionally, we're planning to write a migration script that can be executed manually and on demand to auto-migrate at least some easy rules, only if you want to. And that's it, and I'm open for questions. Thank you.
So the question you have anticipated, I guess, is coming.
I'm curious.
Yeah. In the new check certificate, there's the option to allow self-signed certificates.
Yes.
What about check HTTP?
It's a good point. Actually, we should remove it there too. Now, seriously, there's a difference in monitoring endpoints, HTTP endpoints, where you want to monitor the availability, the content, or login of an endpoint. And the certificate on that point ensures that you're talking to the correct endpoint while providing sensible information and to encrypt the data. If you're monitoring certificates, you want to monitor this specific certificate. And it doesn't matter if it's self-signed or any other certificate, if you monitor it for the issuer, for the subject, for the encryption algorithm, for a serial number or so. So it's much less, it's not possible to have a machine in the middle attack if you monitor the certificate itself. On the other side, monitoring the self-signed certificate is necessary too.
So if I understand correctly, we will build an option that also, when you monitor HTTP endpoints via the HTTP check, you will also be able to do them if they're using self-signed certificates.
Hopefully not. Maybe too. Yeah, that's the thing that we are discussing right now internally. And so why I'm struggling on this answer is one thing. So I truly believe having an option in your rule set to disable the certificate check is not what you want. So let me explain that a little bit more. So if you are in a class and you have a teacher, and the teacher is taking care that everyone is present, and they have to show their ID, and they get the ID from the school, and it's taking it, and suddenly one shows a self-signed ID. So what you not want to do is allow all self-written and painted IDs. You want to allow this particular one. And this is where we want to head in the long term. So if you have the problem, and for example, you have a vSphere server, and this vSphere server is just communicating over 443 HTTPS and has a self-signed certificate, what you want to do is allow this particular self-signed certificate, and you want to do it as easy as possible. What you not want to do is allow any certificate in the world. And what we will work on in the next days, weeks, and months is to think carefully about how can we provide this functionality to you to enable you to have still a safe monitoring.
I mean, our clear goal is that in the end you have a replacement, because we can't deprecate the old check HTTP rule set without giving you an alternative. But what we believe is just allowing you using self-signed certificate and not thinking about the repercussions of that is maybe not the right thing. So therefore, what we are currently discussing internally is what is the best way, how we can do it, enabling you to monitor all HTTP endpoints as you want, but being aware that if you do that, there are also some basically consequences of doing so, and there are many ways how we can solve it, how we can do it better, and we will come up with something in the next couple of weeks and months. Hopefully weeks. Okay.
Next.
So, what about certificates in Windows Store or on file system?
Good question. And we had that question during development, and we decided to not open up that part for now. But it's I guess it's a question for the certificate monitoring. And it's a valid question, and it's a possible feature. So it's depending on you how important that is, if we add that feature later on or not.
I asked the other question first because I have to understand Josef's question before that.
Yeah.
The one from Ralph is quite easy. Is proxy support built in the HTTP check?
Yeah, the answer is also easy. It's yes.
And now I understand.
I can make the answer a little bit longer. Yes, and you can also use now the integrated proxy in Checkmk that you can configure in the global settings. You can use the OS proxy defined, or you can provide a custom proxy.
I'm still struggling with the question.
The first
But
one?
then I looked at when it was asked at 2:06, so 20 minutes ago. So it might have been answered along the way, Josef, with the new check certificate check. Does it answer you? Because I know you're here in the group.
As far as I understand, I just answered the question because it's currently not possible to monitor certificates on a file system. And we're talking about if we add that.
Okay, yeah. Then, I mean,
No.
we're talking about HTTP 2. Do we have HTTP 3 support already?
Not yet. And the reason for that is, correct me if I'm wrong, Andy, the reason for that is the Rust request module that we're using is currently, it has experimental support for HTTP 3.
Do you want to answer yourself?
But no official though.
Okay. But soon? Don't know. Okay.
So it's dependent on the Rust Foundation if they are, and when they add that. Yeah.
Yeah. Would it make sense to rename the old HTTP plugin rule or HTTP rule?
Maybe.
Yeah, I think it makes sense. Yeah. Thanks for the input. So we have from Hans the question, which we also expected, kind of. Yeah.
I would-
mean,
I
if
would
you have
go-
more than 2,500 HTTP checks, how do you migrate them from one to the other version? Yeah. What kind of? And I think
First part is hopefully afterwards you don't need 2,500 rules anymore. And the second part is in my previous slide, which I cannot go back because then you don't see the questions anymore. As I said, we will provide on midterm a migration script that you can execute, but during interviews we discovered that it's almost half-half. Users that want an auto migration or do not want an auto migration. So we decided to be safe and do not force anyone that is being auto migrated without asking, and instead providing a script that you can execute manually if you want to.
from Ingo, how do I configure the password and user in the Checkmk configuration?
So I read a question that you got confused by one of the slides, how to add user and password. And it's simply, there's an option, it's called authentication. And there you have to choose if you want to have a token-based authentication or a basic authentication. Then you enter the username and you can use the password store for passwords or enter it in clear text, which I would not recommend. So it's just simply another option and not included in the plain text field in the rule set of the URL.
Okay, from Christian, a question. Is it possible to also run the script, the new Checkmk v2, also on an agent?
It's the second question. Okay, is the web service?
Yeah, it's always, like people vote, so it skips around. Just listen to what I say.
It's an active check that is running on the Checkmk server itself. So while this plugin is compiled for Linux, you can obviously run it on any Linux system, but it's not meant to be deployed on other systems. For that, we have the RobotMK integration, and we would recommend to use that to make a more extensive monitoring of your endpoints.
Okay, this is an easy one. Is it still possible to use host variables and custom attributes in the new Checkmk plugin?
Yes.
And from Fabian, is it also possible to check the validity of an intermediate or root certificate?
I guess he asked me that question half a year ago, and the answer is no. Currently we just check the chain, if we trust the chain, and not the certificates of the root certificate or intermediate 2, except for the check certificate, where we added the possibility of verify that specific fields of the issuer are correct. So with the check certificate, you can actually, here you are. You can actually monitor if the intermediate is actually this one that you expect.
Okay. There are many more questions. If you have further questions, Marcel is here at the conference the next 2 days. You can always ask him. You can also ask, for example, Andy, our developer. Maybe you can stand up. Maybe then people can see you. He also knows quite a lot about it because there's still a lot of questions here. But we have another talk which also talks about the same stuff, but from the user perspective. And so thanks, Marcel, first for
Thank you.
this talk.